right, welcome again to the Think Orphan podcast. I'm Rick Morton. Excited to have you joining us again today for part two of our interview with Keith McFarland. Keith is the co-author of In Pursuit of Orphan Excellence with my co-host Phil Dark, and we had a great opportunity to sit down and just a really rich interview. If you haven't listened to part one of the interview, I would invite you to go and make sure you catch that, because there's a lot that's there to unpack, and so we just had a great time with Keith, and it was so rich. We just wanted to keep going with the interview and felt like this would be something that you would enjoy and something you would benefit from. And so without any further ado, join Phil and me as we continue our conversation with Keith McFarland.
There's one thing that we have had people not criticize necessarily, but ask questions about what we actually meant with. You talked about it with the fatherhood and the fathers and mothers, and when there's no father, there's something missing. And some people misinterpret that to say, well, single moms, what, they can't raise kids? Like, are they not good enough? What's going on there, right? And people, as we all know, people will misinterpret what we say, and what we write, especially because we see it with social media all the time. People put in black and white different things, and you have 20,000 or 20 million or 20, however many billion people we have that many different interpretations. But I just want to give you a chance I know we've talked about it, and I know you've talked about it on some different things, but what would you say to somebody who said, well, I'm a single mom, and what are you saying to me, that my kids don't have a chance? What's going on here?
Wow. That's good. Boy, oh boy. Here's the reality. Most of our churches, whether we're in Uganda or America, that fatherlessness is an issue across the board. And so most of our churches are being filled with mothers and their children, for the most part. I think that's a pretty steady trend around, right? So there's a pandemic of fatherlessness in a reality. And so, just being real about that, can those mothers raise those children? Absolutely. Does God call them to raise those children? Absolutely. Do they have the double difficult job of having to be mother and father, mom and dad? Man, absolutely. And that's why there is an absolute need for support for the widow, and you can use that broadly in lots of different contexts, and the fatherless, and for his body, the church, to come alongside of that, right? And for men to step up and be fathers to the fatherless in appropriate ways, in appropriate contexts. So, that's a reality in the local church. I would just transfer that over into an orphan care type of situation, because nobody's going to say, I think in the church, you're not saying, well, that's ideal, right? It's ideal. It's not ideal. That is a reality of the brokenness that we live in. But good news, Jesus redeems the broken, right? Good news, he is the Father, and that doesn't change, right? He's the perfect Father. And so when we're talking about the fatherless, especially in the book, what we're challenging is the pretty common model of just saying, and this is really what I found along my trip, my journey, and you've seen it, is, okay, there's a great need. Let's get 1,000, 500, or 100 kids, and let's bring in mothers, and we're good, right? Because we're caring for the children, we're giving them food, and we're giving them shelter, and yet not being uncomfortable with the reality that, man, but that's only half the answer. Like these kids need, the boys especially, but the girls too. I mean, it's both. They need father. They need what God has uniquely designed that fathers input in, on an identity level, on just a spoken level, across the board. So would you say, hey Keith, is it wrong for a single mom to adopt? Say, no, it's not wrong. Some of my good friends in Uganda are single moms, and they've adopted. God's called them to adopt. What we're saying is, but let's be real. Let's be honest about the baggage. Let's not promote that as the ideal, or as if that's going to be easy or easier, right? Any adoption or no adoption is easy. But let's go into it honestly, that there's going to be real challenges and issues that are going to be faced because there isn't a father in the home. And that's just because that's God's design. And of course, let the church rise up and come alongside and support that. And I've had a couple of kids that I am like a father to that are being adopted by single moms in Uganda. So it's and they'll tell you it's not ideal, but in those situations, God absolutely called them to that. So
Keith, obviously that answer, like, you're not afraid to talk about the hard stuff, right? You're going to lay it straight. And another one of those hard topics, but something that is, I think, really near and dear to your heart based on, what I've read and the bit of conversation we've had, is this idea of national leadership. And, and the fact that, I mean, part of what I love about your story is the fact that part of your training and your preparation to do what it is God's called you to do is sitting under the leadership of Ugandan nationals and of others who, really poured pretty deeply into you. And I think it's something we all believe in. You write about it in the book. Man, I'd just love for you to unpack a little bit of that, like your passion for that, your thoughts about, raising up national leadership, and what you personally have benefited from, and where you think that fits for us in the orphan care community.
Boy, it's a good question, and very relevant. I think there's a reality that no matter what culture we're a part of, one of the things that we have to fight for as a people is the unity in the context of diversity and the beauty of the bride that Christ has purchased from every tongue and tribe and language, every nation, and to recognize that in that there's just a great leveling that takes place. That it's not me, we're up here, we have it, because Jesus is going to come right in and say to anybody who thinks they're up here that actually you're in the wrong place. You're going to be on the bottom, right? It's the one down that's going to be up, and it's the first that are going to be last. And you know what? Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the poor. And that's got to be all of us, right? And I think, as I look a bit internationally at missions, or especially in the context of orphan care, it's not uncommon to find Americans that we know better, and we have the finances, we have the education, we have the specialties, we have just the plan, whatever, and whether we're aware of it or not, often to have a bit of a cultural superiority that can come into various contexts. And the reality is that we desperately need to be able to see our poverty and what we have to learn and to receive from the global church, from others. All right. And so if that's not a posture, then any discussion on national leadership is just going to be sort of an up here discussion, like an ideal. It's got to be driven by something much deeper. This isn't even an option, right? It's like, we absolutely have to see people from the nations that are being raised up or empowered to lead, and for us to be able to give and receive. And I think, in that context, we're givers and receivers, all of us, no matter where we come from, and the little old lady deep in the village, you'd think, what does this lady have to offer me? She has so much to offer me as I come with this posture. So commitment to national leadership is really just recognizing that this is God's calling, that as God's people, we have to see nationals empowered and raised up, and that there's beauty there, right? And so genuine partnership is only possible where that's a reality. And I think, one of the hard things, Rick or Phil, is that a lot of times we're not aware of the cultural baggage that we can bring. It's sort of like this hidden baggage, and we've got to be aware of it. And so in a Ugandan context, we've got to be aware of the Ugandan cultural baggage of the big man mentality and the chief mentality and the power hold mentality. But guess what? That's in America too. It's the human heart, even though you're going to see it playing out there in different ways, and for us to be able to also recognize that we have our same things. And so to be able to come into that context, to be aware of the baggage, whether it's colonialistic baggage, like in Uganda, and to be able to lay those at the feet of Jesus and say, okay, Jesus, you died for a multi-ethnic bride, and we want to deal with these realities. We don't want to stereotype, because I think a lot of times I see sort of the stereotypes start coming. Well, we would raise up national leadership, but these ones can't be trusted, or money will always just bring corruption, or and those are real things, but are they really being talked about? And I think one of the things that we love in genuine partnership is genuine relationship, genuine accountability, and seeing team raised up, because that's what Jesus does. He's sending out twos, and you've got you've got the plurality of leadership. And I think that often we throw our eggs in a Western CEO, big man, top down structure, which, not that it can't work, it can with the right oversight and mechanisms, but to also be willing to move outside of some of those thoughts into building leadership teams and seeing what that looks like. So those are just some of my.
And I'd love to press in just even a little bit more there, and think, because I do think as we struggle to do this, there are those innate things that we default to our norms. We default to our almost these instinctive reactions that come out of like how we've grown up, how we've been enculturated, like what we've grown to expect to be right. And I just be like, practically, what's the Lord taught you about just holding that in check, and how have you learned to maybe think differently or conduct yourself differently in order to bring that kind of collaboration and that type of communal spirit with folks from other that are coming from other cultures.
One of the privileges I had really early on was just being able to sit under a Ugandan who, and I wrote this in the book, he's probably the wisest man I've ever met. Just a joy to get to be fathered by him as an older, mature, godly man who's been in ministry to the fatherless for many years. And really just to invite his input, to be able to say, what do I do in this situation? This is how I want to react. For me, I'm a reactor. Okay, I'm gonna respond. I'm gonna say it really quickly, and I've got to catch that, check it, all right, hold it back, and then submit it. And I think that's the hard part, is being willing to submit my thoughts, my feelings, my perceptions, and just start asking others, how do you see this? How am I being perceived? That's something that we almost don't like to go there, but we really have to go there cross-culturally. It's a hard question, because now I've got to deal with those things. How should I respond in this? And dealing with conflict. I think there's a lot of books. If you go on Amazon and look at cross-cultural conflict, right, you're going to see lots of different books come up, because how do we maneuver? We're not speaking the same thing. We're not hearing what we think that we're hearing, or others aren't hearing us as we think they are. So just learning to communicate. It's like learning a different language in a lot of ways. And really my best Ugandan friend, Paul Kasubita, one of my ministry partners and close brother, just being able to pour my guts out to him, and then it's that question. So what do I do? How should I respond here? So just being willing to actually submit.
And I don't want to miss in what you said as well, and just want to point out for folks to just kind of ponder, that takes time.
Yeah.
That takes intention. It takes careful work to do, and I think in the urgency of the task that we see in front of us, we become sometimes so need driven and so overwhelmed by the reality of the need around us that we perceive the urgency there, but we don't perceive the urgency in taking time and being careful and in doing those deliberate things that you're talking about. And I think sometimes maybe even the enemy uses that illusion to really hamstring us at times, because we do become so captivated by the urgency of things. And I appreciate the fact that you're writing about and modeling and showing something in ministry that is careful and considerate and that really does lead to a community spirit in the body and to good, healthy collaboration.
And you're right. It definitely takes time, and that can be a hard one, right? Because when there is so much need, and we want to meet that need, and we want to bring change, and we're the ones with the plan, especially if it's Americans that are involved, right? We're running, we're going, and come on board. Versus it takes time to invest in people, and that was actually one of the things that drew me to New Hope. Was the first 10 years of the ministry, it was just small, very family oriented. Jay Dangers, who is an American, though he grew up in Congo, so he had a bit of an African lens, with Jones Bakimi, and that's what they did. I mean, they lived it out together. There was mutual discipleship, mutual encouragement, and then starting to take in kids together and working through all those hardships together, but taking the time. And the thing I love about Jay is he would consistently want to know, Jones, what do you say? How do you see this? What do you think? And so even the model, how we've structured what we do, hasn't been a very traditional in a Western sense. It's much more African in that way. So it does. It just takes time and willingness to listen and learn and grow. But that's really what you need, right? Because that's going to be the ownership on the ground. That's what's going to impact the community. That makes it our thing versus those people's. And even when we got to New Hope, there were just no fences, and we'd say, what are the fences? And I would hear, if the community isn't our fence, we shouldn't be here. And now, granted, that can't work in certain areas of cities and crime and other things. And we did put up a barbed wire fence at some point, but that was to keep out cows from eating our gardens. But but I loved just that statement, the community as our security fence. Wow. And that's going to come through a commitment to whatever country you're in, Ugandans, in Uganda in that context, and seeing them raised up.
Yeah, Keith, it's so, there's so much there. I mean, as Rick's been talking about, it's like there's so much to mine in these answers, but I do want to focus on a couple. First of all, I just want to mention, folks, if you haven't read the book, again, it's In Pursuit of Orphan Excellence, and the National Leadership Chapter Keith wrote with Jones and Jay. And that was a team product of those men. And I'll tell you what, there's so much wisdom in every chapter, but that National Leadership Chapter is worth the price of the book. And I'm just going to tell you right now, too, Keith and I don't make really any money on this thing. So I'm not trying to, whatever. We really believe it will help you, and because of the people who wrote this book with us. So that was one thing. The other was, I will just tell you folks, so many of us go on these trips, go on to different countries, go into different cultures, even if it's inner city, right? Like if I go to the Tenderloin district in San Francisco, or Brooklyn, New York, or south side of Chicago, it's going to be a very different experience for me, right? It's a totally different world, different culture, different everything, right? We go into countries that we don't speak the language. We bring an interpreter. Or we learn the language, which takes time too, right? Yet we go into countries where we don't know the cultures, and we go in and think we can just go in and do stuff. Fact of the matter is, we need an interpreter for that too. And I'm just going to use a quick example of that. My organization, we did some training over at New Hope Uganda with a team, and we did some training together. Keith and I did some, and my COO, Dave Redco, did some disc training on the leadership principles. And I said a few times a word that I knew wasn't going to translate, but I had no idea what word it was going to be. And I said silo, like we need to get out of our silos, right? And if you're a Jim Collins fan, you're going to use that all the time. I knew it wasn't going to work, but I also knew Keith was there as my interpreter. So he comes up to me, I think it was after the first one. He let me suffer through the first session. But then he goes, Bill, say gardens. And so instead of silos, I just changed it to gardens. And then it was like the room lit up, like, oh, I actually understand this white man. This Mzungu isn't some weirdo using a word that I have no idea what he's talking about. And it changed but that's such a simple little thing that, because Keith is fluent in not only, languages and, of these different places, but the culture, right? And that does take time. And we can't shortcut it. If you try to shortcut it, you're going to step on so many toes. And the thing is, most people won't tell you. They won't tell us that you're stepping on the toes. So with that, Keith, you have over the last, 18 years been at New Hope. But recently, over the last few years, since we've written the book, there have been some leadership transitions. We don't get younger. We tend to age in our lives, and people tend to step away from positions, and things happen. But what have you experienced over the last few years with those leadership transitions, and what are some of the lessons you've learned since writing the book, since writing with Jones and Jay? Actually, what have you learned about the leadership, these things that you've been talking about through those transitions?
Boy, we've definitely been able to grow forward in just this reality of national leadership, and national leadership in relationship to good multicultural partnership. And you can read the book, and you can read Jay and Jones's story is beautiful. Like, they have been brothers. My relationship with those men, I've loved it, and with those that are there. But the reality is that as we walk the journey, it is hard, and we have to fight for relationship, and it's grounded in Christ. And even after walking 20 years, you can still hurt each other. You can still bring mistrust. As Westerners, you can still do dumb things, or pay the price for other Westerners who do dumb things, or the gamut, right? You can fill it in. And so, we've been in a very unique situation where we're transitioning from founders, who are your directors, really into the next generation of leaders. You've got a 30-year-old ministry that's needing to grow forward. And so how do you do that? And I think some of the challenges that we faced, and I think it's pretty common, whether it's in founders ministry or just in transitioning in leadership, would be the reality of what does it mean to raise up and empower, right? And release others to run in what they're gifted in or called to, or in the area of ministry that they're in, openly, accountably, and in a relationship, but to be able to actually release others to fail. We didn't mention that in the national leadership chapter. Maybe we said something small, but typically that's not common language. Release others to fail. It's like, man, but yes. And the reality is that for those of us who've been doing it for so long, it's like, well, no, you guys just keep doing it. You do it so well. Or I've been doing it so long and I do it so well, and you'll take twice the time or make mistakes. I'll just keep doing it. And so I think just being aware of those realities in order to release and give others the space to make mistakes, to mentor them, to train them up. I mean, not mistakes where you're hurting people, right? Not that level of mistake, but just that reality. I think building team, just how important that is in every context, that we're not trying to be those who are isolated. We're the ones who know, we're the ones who act, but we're empowering others. We're raising up others. We're disciple makers, right? I think that should be our language. That's the body of Christ language, and that should be flowing right into any organization that's caring for orphans as well. And so those are hard, real issues that we have to face. And I think all that stuff gets exposed, right? As we're raising up leaders, as we're empowering leaders, and growing forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's so good. That's so good. And I use the analogy sometimes with the free, release them to fail, that, it's like, I think of the teaching our kids to ride a bike, right? You let them go to fall off their bike, but you won't let them ride off a cliff, right?
Right.
You won't let them ride in front of a car. But there's learning in the falling. There's learning in the failing. There's learning in the running into a wall because you don't know how to brake, right? And so it's so hard, though. It's so hard. Yeah. So good. So good. All right, Rick, you want to...
So, Keith, there are a couple of questions that we always kind of seem to work our way to in these interviews. And so I'm going to channel my inner Phil for just a second. And I'm going to ask you, what is it that you have read or watched or listened to that has most impacted your understanding of how to love and care for orphan and vulnerable children?
Well, really, I mean, In Pursuit of Orphan Excellence.
Which I'm sure you've read a bunch of times since 2014.
Um,
Considering you wrote most of it, that's
right.
No, it was the stuff that other people wrote. That was fat, right? It was amazing. And Phil did such a great job of setting it up. Why talk about excellence? And,
just keep going. Talk about a different book.
Come on, he nailed it. I just the reality is that in 1999, 2000, 2001, there just weren't books. There wasn't anything, it really was the Bible. And, I'm reading James 1:27 and like, this just seems like it's out of nowhere. This is pure and undefiled religion before God, the God and Father is this, to care for orphans and widows in their affliction, right? To keep oneself unspotted from the world. Going, how does that fit into the whole Bible? I wish Jesus had said it and make it a lot easier. Not really. It's scripture. But that was my 22-year-old thinking. And so just to start going through the Bible, what does the Bible say? Everything, every verse about the fatherless. What does it say? Is this, and then just getting a big picture that this is really what James is looking back on. James is looking at an entire unveiling of God to his people and saying, man, if you want to see Christianity, this is how I'm going to sum it up. It's right here. And it's grounded in the gospel, right? Before the God and Father, which is in Christ. So honestly, I think, not to sound cliche, but the Bible, has really been my favorite as far as just nurturing that calling. It really affirmed the calling. Because for me, it was like, why do I have this funny desire to just work with children? Am I just weird? And it's like, no, this is scripture. This is God's passion of God, right? This is his spirit at work. And then over the years, I've had fun seeing books come out. I think Tom Davis, The Fields of the Fatherless came out, and I was like, woohoo, all right, we got a book. He's saying stuff that I'm saying. Like, I love that, and he says it beautifully. And he ends it, in this world, you are an orphan awaiting your father. In this world, you are a widow awaiting your bridegroom. In this world, you are a stranger awaiting a home, or something like that. And it was like, come on, man, he nailed it. And so just over the years, seeing that really there's so many good books that are out there. I enjoyed. Now I'm not gonna be able to think of it. It was there. Now it's gone. I want to say Orphan Justice, but that's not?
Yeah, Johnny
Carr.
Good.
Yeah.
Yes, there we go. I really enjoyed that. When it hit the shelves, it was, all those things make me excited because I love seeing the conversation. I love seeing people grounding these things, in God and calling God's people to action.
Man, and like the Bible can't be a bad answer, right? Like that's like if you're connecting all of the scriptures together and you're connecting the big story to that is the best answer. So
normally we say other than the Bible, but I'm glad we didn't in that instance. But actually, we don't say that. We haven't said that for a long time.
We haven't said that for a long time.
Yeah, I know, because I think people kind of caught on. But I'm glad we didn't say that because that was great, man. It's funny, Tom Davis, he's actually living in Barcelona right now, which maybe I shouldn't have said that because now the stalkers are going to go and find him in Barcelona. But I actually talked with him the other day, and he's got a new podcast. Interestingly, it has nothing to do with orphan care, but it's a really cool podcast. As you know, I'm a big soccer guy. It's called The Heroic Mindset. Totally random, but I thought I'd throw that out there since you said Tom, and nobody has mentioned that book. I don't think ever on the show. That's a first.
No way.
Wow. I don't recall ever having Fields of the Fatherless mentioned as that book. So
now we're gonna have to both talk about the book, and we're gonna have to figure out how to have Tom.
We'll have to do it. We'll get Tom on. We'll talk about Heroic Mindset because it's all about soccer. You'll love it, Rick. You'll love it. It's about actually the mindset of an elite athlete, which goes to leadership and goes to a whole lot of other things too.
Then college football will fit nicely into that conversation.
It probably would. Anybody other than Alabama. But so, Keith, last question. I'm so bummed right now. I'm so bummed that we're at the end of this interview. I'm not going to lie. But what one person has most impacted your understanding of how we can love orphan and vulnerable children with excellence?
Can I answer the one person with a dual person answer?
Yeah.
So,
I had a feeling you would. So go ahead.
Because really, I'm going to say Jay Jones, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or Jones Jay, and those two really are. They're like one. They're brothers, and to see these two guys live it out. The sacrifice that they made in the early years. There was no cushion You know, when you read, if you want to read New Hope's story, Jay's daughter, Jenny, who's a precious, good friend, she wrote, oh, you're reaching for it. Maybe it's there. The Long Road to Hope. There it is. Hey, Day of Small Beginnings. So Jenny put together really the history of New Hope. And I mean, these guys are walking into a war-torn zone. You've still got landmines going off and skulls, and bones on the side of the road. That's the reality of what they went into, and the kids that they took in. I mean, these were, hurting kids. So they've lived it. They've sacrificed. I mean, Jay got there, and all funding that he was promised was pulled. He had no money. He had nothing. I mean, these guys, they were like, well, God, here we are. It's kind of a George Mueller, well, you're the father of the fatherless, so I guess it's your job to provide. So we're going to trust you, So just being able to watch, them live it out, and to watch Jones, really, he's amazing. Like, I've watched him in painful situations, hard situations where I'm going, what would I say right now? And I just watch Jones just in this beautiful father way, just speak right into these really, really hard things. And that's just been a privilege for me to get to watch, to learn from, and to just see the consistency of how they father so many, but not forsaking their children, right? Now, I want to let me end with that one, because it's easy to create fatherless children in the attempts to care for the fatherless. It's easy to leave your kids behind by caring for kids. And I've really appreciated Jenny and her voice and the way that she was able to articulate some of her struggles at times, wondering, God, so are you not my father if you're the father of the fatherless? And, or feeling guilty because I have a dad, and just learning from them on so many different levels. They're very open, very wise. They need to write like 5 books. That'd be helpful. Yeah.
Wow, man. Hey, I'm not just saying this because I'm looking at you on a Zoom call. I am so proud to call you brother, to call you my friend, to have been able to go in the trenches with you to write this book. It's truly an honor. I hope folks out there, you've had just a taste of the wisdom this man has, that God has just spoken through him and continues to speak through him. And I will tell you, I know I'm bragging on him. I feel like, actual brother, because that's what I feel like with you. But it's because you're in the Word. It's because you are continually in prayer. You with your family. I wish we could just put out there how you each year you take your son through a different word that helps grow them into a man, and they focus on that for the whole year. And man, I know that you do that. I want to do it, and I just feel like, I never get around to it. But you are so intentional. You're the real deal, brother. I just want to thank you for that. I wanted to say that to whoever's listening, because I truly believe that, and I'm just honored that God brought us together a few years ago.
Thank you. I'm saying there's not a halo there. Come to my house and you'll see.
No, he's not so perfect, but that's what's so great. You're not real. I mean, you're not real. You are real. You are real. And it's real, and I have been there with you. But I will say, though, you are seeking, you are pursuing God. You are pursuing that excellence that we talked about. I say that because I do want people to know and understand that when you say stuff, it's not just a dude in some ivory tower saying this is what, I think, and I'm just musing. It's a guy who's living it and trying and struggling. That freedom to fail, that, releasing to fail. You do fail, but you know what? That's not the end. That's not the end of the story, right? And so that's just, I do want to say that. And I knew that it would be, just receive it, brother. Just receive it.
Thank you.
Keith, thanks. Been such a privilege to be able to do this interview with you and just spend some time, and thanks for sharing and going deep with us.
Thank you, Rick. I've loved the time. It's been fun to get to know you a little bit too, and just to get to be here with you guys.
Well, if you couldn't tell, I really do respect and love that man. And I just thank you again, Keith, for being a part of this show. And I will tell you, the book, and I tell this to people a lot, the book In Pursuit of Orphan Excellence became what it was when Keith McFarland came onto the project. And I say that because we pushed each other to be better. That's what teammates do. That's what collaborators do. When you're truly working together for one project, when you're working together for one message, for one goal together, you push each other to where you would never have gone if somebody wasn't pushing you. And so I think we pushed each other in our thinking. We pushed each other in what we covered. We pushed each other in what we knew we could do. There were some chapters that, as you'll see, he wrote that he didn't feel like he was competent enough to write. And I had to come behind him and say, you are. I have no doubt. And just put pen to paper and let's see what comes out, right? And without that, I think that it's a struggle. So we're not going to talk a lot right now about that. We do want you to just, I think Rick and I talked about it, and it's just, man, that was so rich. We want you to just be able to think about it, to bask in it, and just to really think, what is God teaching me through this? And go back and listen again to it. This is the second part of the two-part episode, as you know, if you're listening to this. Go back and listen to the first part. If you hadn't, if you just somehow stumbled upon this part too, go back and listen to the first part because it will provide a lot of context. But Rick, I just want to ask you, you wrote Orphanology with Tony. And did you feel kind of the same way with writing that book? Like that it was pushing each other? Or was it different?
Yeah, but it was different. I think we were serving together, and we were in the middle of doing the thing that we were writing about and more together. And so I think the difference in what you guys experienced, first of all, it's a much larger collaboration, and and we reference a lot of people in the book and that kind of thing, but we didn't have collaborative relationships with any of them. I think the other thing too is like you've got to sort of look into the backdrop that Tony and I known each other for a long time, and in one way or another we had served with each other, alongside each other for the better part of 8 or 10 years by the time we wrote Orphanology. And so I tell people sometimes that our relationship, to put this in a very American, very first world Western kind of, it was like Stockton and Malone, right? Like it was that relationship of the guys on the basketball court that are playing with each other that don't have to see each other to know where they are. And so as we really began to frame up Orphanology, that was so much a product of just dozens and hundreds of hours of life and conversations and things that when we actually started to really put the outline together and begin to frame the book up, it came together pretty effortlessly. But in our writing, to be honest with you, we really didn't collaborate a whole lot. We took our pieces and we went and did our thing. And then when we were finished with something or at a point where, we'd share it with each other and kind of go back and forth. But the thing that was kind of remarkable about it is even when we did that, it wasn't like there was a whole lot of editorial, stuff between the two of us, because we were just so much on the same page that it just kind of flowed together. And I think that's, that to me just plays back into, some of the things that Keith really emphasized even in the interview with his, his relationships at New Hope and some of the things that have grown and flourished there, that he's talked about. It was Tony and my collaboration was the result of an experience like that. And so it was just very different.
Yeah.
And,
I think that's good. That's something that I think is important to understand too. Like there's different things that will come out of different teams and different projects. And you guys, as you said, you experienced that together. And so probably was more of is that really what happened? Is that exactly what, when you come back on saying you're on the same page, but maybe there were a couple little things here and there. But with us,
there was just so much we had processed along the way with each other that stuff was kind of already said and worked out and worked through, because we were just pretty deeply connected in life in a lot of ways. And so our ministries were connected, and we served with each other in a variety of capacities. our families were interconnected, and our adoption stories and all those kind of things. We, he was a part of my life. I was a part of his life for all of that.
Yeah.
And so as we were, it's funny. And there are times where it's really funny now, even going back and reading the book. It's like, I mean, I know who wrote what and all. It's hard to, it's hard to even find it if you don't know what you're looking for. And honestly, there was not a lot of editorial work that even had to come to that to make it fit that way.
Right.
Because we were just in that season, we're just very much in sync and walking together.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I love how the different projects, the different teams, they take different shapes, right? And it's just like anything else. So there's no rule book. And I think that's part of even In Pursuit, going back to In Pursuit and just what we talked about, and even hearing Keith talk through that interview, it's clear that there is no, the book is not a how-to. The book is a framing of a conversation of how can we do this together? And what does it look like to pursue this excellence together? And even in the conversation of family, there are ideals, but there's also brokenness, and it is, as he said, it's rooted in suffering. And so, those are.
It's every bit as relevant a conversation today as the day it was published.
Absolutely.
And I think, one of the things you won't say it, but I'll say it to the folks that are listening to us. If if you're passionate in this area and you haven't picked the book up and you haven't considered the stuff that's there, you need to, because I think it is it's an evergreen conversation, and it's not a paint by the numbers project. It's not a how-to. But it surfaces some, really key points and key perspectives that have to be wrestled with if you're gonna serve in this area and do that to the glory of the Lord. These are things you have to wrestle with.
And I will say, it's not just a book for, some people are like, oh, it's a book about orphanages. No, it's not. It's a book about how we can love orphan and vulnerable children, what they need, how we can wrestle with the things that we know children need. I've told people I use this book in my parenting. What I learned writing this book in my parenting of my 5 biological children. There are principles in here. It's biblical. It's a book about justice. It's a book about making things right. What does that look like in the context of orphan and vulnerable children? And that is something that we sought to do. You heard from Keith's heart. You've heard from mine over the last, 150 episodes if you listened to them. Just our heart is to help people. Our heart is to encourage and build people up. Our heart is to help people understand how they can flourish. And that comes through in that book. And I will tell you, there are people on that. All 15 authors are people that are struggling with understanding all these things we're writing about. And so I too would say, we're really starting to, what I want to start doing in our episodes is picking a couple takeaways and or action steps out of the interviews, out of the conversations that we're having. We always say use everything that you're learning to help you understand how you can love the children better. But I want to just kind of think about together, what are some action steps we can take? And the one I was really thinking about today is, if you've read the book, go pick it up again and read it with fresh eyes today. And through the lens of what Keith talked about in that interview, and through the lens of maybe how you've engaged some of the conversations we've had on this show, in the work that you're doing, in the understanding of the conversations you've been having, read it with fresh eyes. And I myself am going to do that because I haven't read it for a while. When you write a book, you read it so much, the thought of reading it again is just somewhat repulsive, quite frankly. But I will say, read that. Read the book. Pick it up. If you haven't read it, read it. And engage it. And I would say the other action step I would have is find some place that you're uncomfortable culturally. Find a place that you're uncomfortable and enter into that and learn it at some level. Find someone who knows that, who's fluent in your language, in your culture, and fluent in that other culture. Get out of your comfort zone and engage a culture that is a challenge, and learn. Don't go in thinking you know what the right answer is for anything. Just go in and learn and see what God shows you and teaches you about yourself and that identity that Keith talked about. Man, that's there. It's rich, as we said at the beginning. Just bask in this interview. Listen to it. Just wrestle with it. Engage it. Rick, do you have any other takeaway action stuff that you thought of, or?
Man, I think here's what I would say. I'm really interested to hear what our listeners' takeaways, action steps. And so what I'd really like to ask the folks that are out there that are listening to us to do, hit us up on the Facebook page, hit us up, through social media, come connect with us on the Connect tab on our website. And what are the things that God rose up in your heart as a result of the interview with Keith? What are the action steps and the takeaways that you're bringing away? It'd be a great help to us to hear that. It'd be a great encouragement. I think it also, we want to hear where you are. We want to hear what you're thinking, because it really helps us to know how to guide this podcast and how to think about the interviews and the people that we get together to bring before you, and the directions that we move. And so we would love to hear from you. And I, for my part, one of my action steps is, there was so much packed into this interview and over these 2 episodes, is just personally, I feel like I'm going to need to go back and kind of dwell over and conserve over these conversations a little bit, because it was just so, so deep and so rich. And so, but yeah, let us hear from you.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'd say by the time this airs, actually, it's already up. I haven't finalized, put finishing touches on it, but we will have a Facebook group that I invite all of you to join. The nice thing with Facebook groups versus pages is you can post stuff. You can engage the conversation with things that you're reading, that you're seeing, other podcasts that you're listening to that will help inform our community, that we can truly have these conversations that aren't just us posting something onto a page and having you comment, but you can actually be commenting on those, yes. But if you want to go deeper into this conversation with us and be a part of this at that deeper level, join the Facebook group so that we can have those conversations there. And I don't want to put something else on your desk that you feel like is another project that you have to do. But I get excited to go deeper with you. I get excited when I see emails from you. Don't feel like you're bugging me or Rick. We get excited with the engagement, with the conversation. It's something that it's part of why we do what we do. We want to really be able to engage with you and have these conversations at deeper levels. So that's why we're starting this Facebook group. As I'm learning, Facebook groups are a much better place to engage than a Facebook page. And it's a learning curve. It's a culture I'm not fluent in, and I'm learning from other people on how to do this thing. So with that, folks, keep learning, keep engaging, keep asking the hard questions, keep seeking those answers, keep pursuing excellence, and just use all that you're learning, all that you're just finding, all that you're hearing on this podcast, all that you're reading in the books you're engaging, and use it to help you to understand how you can love orphan and vulnerable children better and better each and every day. Thanks a lot. Have a great week.